Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So there is a ruling in the Quran that states that it is impermissible or you are exempt from fasting if you are traveling. If you leave your city state about 35 kilometers, or the area that you live in, wherever its border is, if you leave 35 kilometers past that, your fast becomes invalid and you can break your fast. This is in the books of Islamic law. It's also in the Quran. We'll read it and we'll explain it a little bit because it might not apply today. For fasting to be obligatory, the person must be present and not traveling, as discussed in the rules of prayer. If a person begins their journey and leaves the last house of their town before midday, intending to travel the required distance, their fast is invalid, even if they did not intend to travel the night before. However, they may not eat or drink until they pass the travel boundary, and once you reach a certain limit. If they begin their journey after midday, their fast for that day remains valid and they must complete it despite being on a journey. Some scholars are discussing, because you might hear this a lot and people do it. There are people today that will drive up to Wollongong, break their fast and come back because they've driven outside of their city by about 35 to 40 kilometers. The Quran literally states, if you are traveling, and the Prophet said, this is the distance that you need to travel for the fast to be invalid or broken. But imagine traveling 30 kilometers in 7th century Arabia on a horse or walking. Imagine you didn't have a horse or a camel or a chariot and you were walking. 30 kilometers is a long distance. But today, is a 30-kilometer drive that long in the car? It could be a hot summer and you've got air conditioning and Taylor Swift in the background. Or it could be freezing and raining and you've got your heater on. ما في مشكلة. So some scholars are debating whether this applies 100%. But to be honest with you, they can't change the law. They can caution and say, look, let's have a discussion about it, unless all the scholars gather and they have something called al-ijma', which is consensus, then they can't change the ruling. So, according to some scholars today, this might not apply anymore. We'll read 158, but it's good to know it so we might be able to discuss it or teach it in the future. A person traveling to their home or to a place where they intend to stay for at least 10 days and who arrives there before midday must intend to fast and continue fasting if they did not eat or drink during the journey. However, if they travel before midday and arrive after midday, their fast for the day is invalid. Similarly, if they travel to a place outside their hometown before midday without intending to stay there, their fast is invalid regardless of whether they arrive before or after midday. So if you leave before Fajr or just at Fajr, you don't fast. If you leave after midday, you continue your fast. But as I said, there's a big controversy on it. And surely if you drove 300 kilometers outside your city state, from here to Canberra, 3 hours, you'll get there and back in all comfort and then break your fast at night, no problem. Unless fasting will cause you, this is an important point here. If you're driving, if you have to travel, and you're driving for more than a couple of hours, stop, revive, survive. Nahna, we wake up in the morning and we're going for a long journey or a couple of hour drive. We have coffee and we have breakfast and a jam donut and we're full of sugar and still we start falling asleep and we get tired. Imagine not eating and drinking, not having any caffeine, not drinking any water, not having any carbohydrates to fuel the body. You could potentially cause harm to yourself and others. So if you are going to travel a distance in the car and you are intending to fast, then this law could apply, that your fast will be invalid or you are exempt from fasting and you will make it up at a later time so you do not harm others. There's a law in Islam and it precedes everything else, that you will not allow harm to come to yourself or others. The preservation of life is the most important thing in Islam. So if you must not pray, not fast, or be exempt from any Islamic ruling to save a life or to save your own life, that is permissible. And inshallah, in the future, we'll talk about those circumstances. Number 159, who is exempt from fasting? So we all know this, a woman who is menstruating, or she has just given birth and, what do they call it, postpartum bleeding. For a woman to be obligated to fast, she must not be menstruating or experiencing postpartum bleeding. In these cases, she is exempt from fasting and must make up the missed fasts later. Hala, we'll talk how do we make them up later. The person fasting must avoid the following. Obviously, eating and drinking. They're the first two. Eating and drinking, it is not allowed to consume anything, even something as small as food remnants stuck between the teeth. It is permissible to swallow saliva as long as it remains in the mouth, and it is also fine to swallow any bodily secretions that come from the head or chest. Mucus, yani. And we all know this. Vomiting invalidates the fast if done intentionally, even if it is due to necessity. And if someone's feeling sick and they need to relieve themselves, their fast is broken. However, if they vomit, if the vomit happens involuntarily without control, the fast remains valid. Are these all understood? I don't need to explain any further on these issues. Insertion of liquid into the body, such as through an enema or intravenous fluids. This breaks the fast. So, for you that don't know what an enema is, do you remember when we were younger, there's a thing called the tahmile? Does everyone remember that? So it goes from the back. In liquid form, it breaks the fast. All right? Even if it is necessary, it still breaks the fast. However, things like injections, suppositories do not break the fast. So if you need an injection or something, it does not break your fast. Similarly, putting drops in the eyes or ears does not invalidate the fast, even if the person feels the taste in their mouth, though it should be avoided for the nose, yani when you spray something in your nose. Number 5, we all know this.
Now there's a question here. Number 4, someone asked last week if they want to donate some blood.
Okay. So donating blood does not break the fast. However, it is highly discouraged, as it might put you at harm and cause you to feel weaker than you already are while you are fasting. So right now we're all feeling weak. Imagine, I don't know how much they take out of you when you donate blood, half a litre. That sounds like a lot. Anyway, so that blood coming out of you could cause you further weakness, and it could cause harm to the body, or may cause you to break your fast. So the scholars said it is better to avoid donating blood while you are fasting, unless, again, unless it is to save a life. And if you're just storing it, avoid it. But if somebody needs blood on the ASAP and you are their blood type and they need it, then you will donate your blood and break your fast if you feel sick, and you are excused. Because what did we say? The number 1 rule is to preserve a life. So number 5, intercourse. It is prohibited for a fasting person to engage in activity during the day, and it invalidates the fast for both men and women. Even without, well, maybe we all know the rules, right? So there is no during the day. This is important, but number 6. And these are narrations from the Imams of Ahlul Bayt and the Prophet. So remaining in a state of ritual impurity. If a person becomes ritually impure during the night, they must not intentionally delay performing the required purification until after dawn. If they do, their fast is invalid. However, a fast is not invalidated by experiencing a wet dream during the day, nor does it invalidate the fast of a person making up missed fast if they wake up in a state of ritual impurity. Now, I must say something. There should be no embarrassment in religion, because sooner or later, someone's going to ask these questions, or the discussion's going to happen at home. And I know we never speak about this, and we probably never spoke about these things growing up, but generally, if you're doing an Islamic course, or if you go to any mosque in the world, if they bring up these Islamic laws, they'll speak about them comfortably, and they're not embarrassed to say it, because it is a normal human experience, and we experience these things on the daily. And they are part of our daily lives. So stop snickering. All right? So what is ritual impurity? What is al-janaba? Does anyone know what janaba is? In the Quran it says, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ جُنُوبًا فَتَغَسَّلُوا or فَاغْتَسِلُوا. Does anyone know what janaba is? Impurity from what? From being with your spouse. So, you are in a state of ritual impurity. You must wash before dawn if you intend to fast the next day for your fast to be valid. If you do not do this, if you intentionally don't do it and say, well, look, I'm not bothered, maybe I'll do it in the morning when I wake up. And you wake up at 8, 9 o'clock and you intend to fast, but you're still ritually impure from the night before, as stated by the Quran, your fast becomes invalid. And you will have to make up that day again and pay possibly the kafara for it. Hala, we'll talk about what the kafara is. So these are rules that we should know. And if a man is sleeping and he experiences a dream, obviously not intentionally, his fast is still valid, but he must wash and clean himself. It is forbidden for a fasting person to dip their head into water. This doesn't mean showering. So you can go and have a shower normal, but to dive in the water or to insert your whole head in the water one hit, this is impermissible while you are fasting. According to some scholars, it breaks the fast. But to another group of scholars, it doesn't. So I chose so swimming, yes. You can jump in the water, dog paddle, float on your back, sit on your little floaty, no problem. But to immerse the head in water, it is impermissible while you are fasting. Because what happens when you dive in, water goes through your nose a lot of the times and you swallow that water. So if they do so, they have committed a sin, but their fast remains valid. Again, according to most scholars, it breaks your fast. Inhaling dust or steam does not invalidate the fast, whether done intentionally or by mistake, though it is better to avoid inhaling large amounts of it intentionally. So that means, for example, your puffer, if you're asthmatic and you need to take a puffer, that's perfectly fine. It does not break your fast. These actions only invalidate the fast if done intentionally by the fasting person. If the fasting person commits any of these acts by mistake, they are not considered to have broken their fast. So like we said at the beginning, our brother Alex said, a lot of this has to do with your intention. If your intention is pure and you made a mistake, then it's okay. I don't know if you've ever seen that video about the guy who called up Mufti Menk. Have you seen that video? And he tripped over and he ate a shawarma sandwich accidentally and an apple slipped into his mouth and 3 liters of water. He says to the Sheikh, am I still fasting or did Allah feed me? So of course, and even if it's by mistake, imagine you were fasting. The first few days is always the hardest. Pay attention to this. The first few days is always the hardest and you're not in the habit of it yet and you might forget that you're fasting. You actually might come, it's 6 o'clock in the morning, half an hour ago you remembered that you were fasting and you said, I'm fasting. And we're still a bit slow, we're still in zombie mode in the morning. We put the kettle on and start making a coffee and start drinking it. And then you're halfway through the coffee and you say, Astaghfirullah, what am I doing? I'm fasting. What do you do in that case? And you had no intention and your intention was clear. And anjad, you definitely forgot. What happens then?
Continue fasting.
You continue fasting. And these things, they happen. It happened to my cousin the other day. He came up to me and he said, what time does suhoor finish? Imsak. I said, 5:15 and at Fajr prayer. He goes, because I drank water at 5:30. Like, I go, okay, a sip, yani, it's okay, you didn't know. He goes, no, look, I drank a whole bottle of water and I forgot I was fasting. No, he goes, I didn't forget I was fasting. He said, I didn't know what time suhoor ends. I thought just before the sun comes up, right? He goes, so I thought, no, I still had a bit of time, 5:30, and I can drink a bottle of water. I said, look, obviously because you didn't know, you don't break your fast, you continue fasting for the rest of the day. The look of disappointment on his face, man. He thought, and then after that, apparently he had breakfast at 5:45 while it was still dark. I said, you're still fasting because you didn't know. He was looking for a way out, mind you. The point is, anything done by mistake, even if it's 10 minutes before ftur, you thought you heard the adhan. Yeah, you thought you heard the adhan. Someone told you it's the adhan, Allahu Akbar, say Bismillah and eat. And it turns out you were 10, 15 minutes early. But your intention was pure because you believed the honorable, trustworthy person. There is no blame on you. And your fast counts for the day. 165.
64.
Did I do? Just as intentional acts count as breaking the fast, coercion also counts. If someone is forced to break their fast through compulsion, their fast is invalidated, but they are not sinful. They only need to make up the fast later. Now, how do we know these things? That's it's a statement. Things like this are not mentioned in the Quran. Where do we get them from? Just so you know, because these are a lot of statements, and you're not going to find any of these in Surah Al-Baqarah, or Surah Al-Imran, or Surah Yusuf, or Surah Yasin. Where do we get the bulk of our Islamic laws from, just so you know? We get them from the narrations of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt, alayhim salamullah. And if a narration pops up a lot that the Imams have spoken about, like an issue like this, and the chain of narrators is correct, and we can trace it back to the time of the Imam, and everybody in the chain of narrators is sadiq and thiqah, then we have, as an Islamic scholar, I have no choice but to say, that's the only proof we have for this certain ruling. And we have to follow it. Until we find something in another book of law, or we find a hadith that might contradict it that are clearer, but until then, we follow the rules set out by the Imams in their narrations. If a person knowingly and intentionally consumes anything that breaks their fast, they must make up the fast for that day and pay a penalty. So if you knowingly break your fast, willingly, you woke up one morning and 2 hours into fasting, you said, man, this is hard. I didn't have a good night last night. The caffeine is getting to me. I need to have a cup of coffee. I need to have 7 scrambled eggs and labni and za'atar. I just can't take it anymore. So you break your fast intentionally, and you are not sick, and you're not on a journey, and none of you are menstruating, and you break your fast, then you must make that day up, and there's a penalty to pay, and this penalty must be paid. Otherwise, it stays against you on the day of judgment, and you have not expiated that sin. It's not enough to say, Allah, sorry Allah ysamihni, I had a good heart, I just didn't want to fast that day. Inshallah, I'll make it up in a couple of months. Baskun martah, it's nice, it'll be winter, I'll be at home doing nothing, I'll fast that day. God says, no worries, you can do that, but there's a kafara to pay. So a kafara in Arabic, the English translation is expiation. So what is your penalty if you break your fast intentionally? You can either fast 2 consecutive months, 2 straight months, one day after the other. You fast 30 days, 1 month, and then you fast 1 day into the next month, which will make 31 days. Obviously not 60 days. So that's one option. Or you feed 60 poor people for every day that you broke your fast. So you broke your fast today, you must make up this day, and you owe 31 days of fasting for that day, or you feed 60 poor people for that 1 day. And what's the amount? 750 grams of food staple, which is either wheat, rice, barley, or something like that.
How many people are you feeding?
60. 60. So either fast for 2 months or 2 consecutive months, or feed 60 poor people, and you have to make up the day. However, if the person was ignorant of what constitutes a valid fast, they are only required to make up the missed fast. Do we know what that means? And if the person didn't know that this would break their fast, all right, and then someone told them their fast was invalid, all they need to do is make up that day. But if they knew that it would break their fast and they did it anyway, then they make up the day and they pay the penalty for it. Unless the act they committed was unlawful in itself and they knew it was wrong. In that case, their fast is invalid. They must make up the fast and pay the penalty, even if they were unaware that the act was one that breaks the fast. We all understood that, yeah? There is a rule that if anybody breaks their fast due to a haram act, so there are things that are haram that break the fast. There are sins, this is important. There are sins that break the fast, and there are sins that are impermissible in Islam. They're not good for your spirituality, but from an Islamic perspective, they don't break the fast. All right, we'll talk about them soon. But if you broke your fast on something that is haram, and I'll give you one example of it, and this is the most common example they use, and the one that's used the most in the Islamic laws, is something like zina, right? If someone was to commit that act, which is impermissible, number one. Number two, it breaks the fast, even with husband and wife. So if they were to do that, they must make up that day, and they have both penalties to pay. So they must fast 2 consecutive months and feed 60 poor people, according to the majority of scholars, because they broke their fast unlawfully, with an unlawful act. Does that make sense? So they didn't just break their fast, they broke it through an unlawful act as well. If the person was unable to fast due to a valid excuse, or without an excuse, they must make up the missed fast after the month of Ramadan. So either way, you must make it up. They are not obliged to complete the make-up fast before the next Ramadan, though it is preferable to do so. If they delay it until the next Ramadan, they must pay a compensation fee, which is 3/4 of a kilogram of wheat or its equivalent, to be given to a poor person. I think we've missed out a lot. There's a lot we went through growing up that we didn't know how extreme it was to break your fast, and what rules there are, and how bad it is, and just to leave your fast going like that. So here it's saying, how quick do you have to make up your fast? And if Shahr Ramadan is finished and you owe, say, 3 days of fasting, right? So for the sisters as well, you had that time of the month and you couldn't fast for 4 or 5 days. Now, Shahr Ramadan's finished. Obviously, you do not fast the day of Eid. We said it is impermissible to fast the day of Eid. And now you have 5 or 6 days to make up for the days that you missed in the month of Ramadan. You do not have to make them up straight away. And you don't have to do them 5-6 days in a row. It is preferable that you make them up before the next Ramadan, before the next month sets in. If you do not make them up before the next month sets in, then there is a small penalty to pay. But you can do them once a month. You know, you've got 11 months or 12 months to the next Shahr. You could fast 1 day in that month. Mark it off. Okay, I've got 4 days left. Next month you fast. Okay, I've got 3 days. So you don't have to do them one after the other. You can if you want. If you are able to, you can. Yes?
Okay, what if before all of this you didn't know you had to make up your fast? And like say you didn't make up your fast for like 4 years. You could make up all of those and pay the poor person or no?
Hallelujah. If you didn't know that you had to make them up, yeah, then just start fasting.
No harm.
Just start fasting from the day that you found out you had to make them all up. But there are narrations that we have that if somebody missed out so much in their life, right? If someone missed out so much in their life, imagine someone didn't fast for 15, 20 years. That's 30 days, times that by 10, that's 300 days, times that by 20, that's about 600 days. I don't think anyone's going to make up 600 days of fasting. It's going to be very hard. They'll become malnutritioned at the end of it. And if they try doing, a few days a year, so there's an exemption on that. So what they might do, they'll make up something. And wallah, I have an intention that this year at least, I'm going to fast every Monday. There's a hadith that it's recommended, the Prophet used to do this. He used to fast every Monday and every Thursday. And we all know these things. So this person might say, you know what, for this year, I'll do Shahr Ramadan, and the rest of the year, I'm going to fast every Monday, and to make up what I've missed in my life. But to make up 300 or 600 days of fasting, that's very hard. Now, Hala, you've seen a lot here, penalties, feeding poor people. And if you don't make up your fast before the next Ramadan, you're not going to go to hellfire, but there's a penalty to pay for it. And it's food. And it's always given it to the poor people. Someone might look at that and say, what's all this money stuff about? Why are we always paying money? You're not paying money to a government here. And you're not doing anything excessive with it. What are you doing? You're feeding the poor with it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that the human being is going to slip up. And He also wants us to help one another. And He wants to eradicate the class system. Right? So there's the 1%ers, then there's the middle class, and then there's the extreme poverty. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to bring down the 1%ers, and He wants to bring up those who are living in extreme poverty, so that they're all at least on a similar level. Not exactly the same level. Some people have a mind for business and they might be a bit more successful than others. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to get rid of that class system. So what do? We pay things like zakat. When we have a sin, يحلف الكذب. You said, Wallahi, la af'al kadha. And you didn't. Allah says you fast for 3 days or you feed the poor. Right? So that there could be charity amongst the Muslims and the poor can eat, and that we can bring up that lower class ba'ah and everyone can start being, because people are going to break these rules all the time.
So when we talk about charities though, like certain charities that have the right intentions to give, so how can, as a community, give the money to someone that we can trust in terms of taking care of animals? Like I won't give my money to the Red Cross or like stuff like that, because, what they do for money. But so how can we as a community give money to someone, especially if it's something to account, how do we give money to people that we can trust?
That's a good question.
It's hard. I find it very difficult to trust so much in brands to help people where they can be using something that's good for their own. So how can we as a community find someone to give our money to help out, this or for the school, or for overseas?
Alright, so first and foremost, this is what we do. The Quran gave us rules on who to give charity to first. Right? The first thing the Quran tells us is the number one group of people who should receive charity from you is your closest family members. So we've all got family members, or maybe not in Australia, maybe in Australia, but mainly overseas. We all have close blood relatives who are not doing it too well. So put aside charity organizations first and foremost. We send to our first blood relatives. Not mum and dad. Mum and dad is an obligation. It is not a charity. Alright? But further than that, brothers, cousins, sisters, aunties, uncles, second cousins, third cousins, and we get further and further. Then what? Then your community members, the Muslims. You give them your money first. We have a community. We know most of us here, if we go back 3 generations, we're probably related. So my relatives are probably your relatives are my relatives. So we give our money to our community, whether it's here or whether it's overseas, or if our community is building a school or a mosque or needs any kind of charity, then we help them first and foremost. A lot of Western charities who say they're going to help overseas. Charity for Africa. Sponsor a child in a third world country. And they're sponsoring. And the white people are going crazy with it. And they're paying charity and they're doing a lot of good things. And those countries are just getting poorer. And there's conflicts. And they're dying by the thousands. What do they do with that money? And of course, I'm not saying that no money gets to them whatsoever, but I'm saying, how can I trust it? But if I send my money to my relatives who I know for sure are doing it tough, all right, and then that money reaches them via Western Union, and then you wake up in the morning and you have a WhatsApp audio message from your auntie or uncle overseas telling you thank you. And we know we've done good. We know that they've received the money. Or you might have a trusted family member over there that you might send money to them and tell them, give some to those around you who you know are not doing it well. That's who we give to. Rule 167. If a person continues to be ill for the entire year and is unable to make up the fast before the following Ramadan, they are exempt from making up the fast. And if you were sick the whole year, all right, and you couldn't make up those few days, then you're completely exempt because you were ill the whole year, and you didn't have a chance to make up your fast. However, once you get better, again, they must pay the fee as mentioned earlier. Again, it is always that fee is there to feed the poor and to feed those that are less fortunate than you. But what if you don't have the means to feed anybody? What if you don't have them? What if you were a poor person? You know, this might not apply to us today, but overseas, people in Gaza, people in Syria, people in Yemen, people in Africa who are fasting and they miss the fast to an illness, due to an illness, and they have to pay some sort of compensation to the poor, and they are poor themselves and they are needy. Obviously, they are exempt from that. This talk is for those who can afford it. Beautiful, and that was the last law. Does anybody have any rules? Yes, of course.
What if people use paying for an excuse not to make up their fast? Is that haram? Well, Allah will know your intention, so...
You know what? I'll tell you something. There's something, it's called al-hil al-shar'iyyah. And know how to loophole around the Islamic laws, right? Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if you read in the verse, what did He say? He said, indeed, we want from you ease, not hardship. Nuridu bikumul yusra, la nuridu bikumul usr. And we want ease from you. So imagine you didn't fast. You got to pay the poor penalty, right? You have to pay the poor penalty. But you still owe 30 days of fasting. It's not that you don't fast, you just didn't fast 30 days straight in the month of Ramadan. But you owe 30 days of fasting. Imagine you didn't fast the whole entire month. You said, you know what, I'm going to feed 60 poor people every day. I got a pay rise from my job. Alhamdulillah, I'm doing it well. I feel I'm able to feed 60 poor people every day. It's still a sin on you. And that sin is there. You fed 60 poor people. Allah knows your intention. But you still owe 30 days of fasting. And you still have to make them up. And if you don't make them up before the next Ramadan, then for every day, you still have to pay another expiation, another kafara. So regardless, you have to fast those 30 days. But this time you can do them separately. You don't have to do them 30 days in a row. You might do them twice a week, once a week, a couple of times a month. But you owe those fasts to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they are beneficial for your spirituality.
People with illness.
Hello. Didn't we did that last week?
That they can fast at all.
They pay the penalty. Not penalty, but they pay the fidya bisammuwa.
So speaking about that, what if they have the intention to fast and what they think they're doing is drinking water, obviously for medication? Is that not?
No, if they drink water, then their fast is invalid.
But what if they're sick?
Yeah, then that's fine. They don't have to make up any, if they're sick always. So if they can never fast, if they can never, yeah. No, the fast will remain invalid. There will be no sin on them, and Allah will reward them through their illness. And because you were ill, and don't think, wallah, imagine you came on the Day of Judgment. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is very just, very merciful. Imagine you come on the Day of Judgment and you don't, because you were ill, you couldn't fast, so you don't have these great rewards of fasting. No, you will have rewards in the hereafter, inshallah. But you can't fast due to your illness. And there is a fidya to pay at the end of it. It's something small. If you can afford it, if you can't, then you're completely exempt.
How much the fidya?
The fidya is 750 grams of food stuff. Food staples. What is it?
Every day.
For every day. Or if someone couldn't fast at all, then they pay one fidya at the end of it. ما بتصير لأنه ما بيصير عدل. إنه ما بيقدروا يصوموا. هيديك اللي بيقدر يصوم وما بده يصوم. فيلا ادفع 750 جرام على كل على 60 شخص. So just so you know, anyone ill, completely ill, always ill, that has a medical condition, so diabetes, or I don't know, help me out here. What's another illness that? What is that?
The heart.
Blood, anything that will cause harm, that will not allow you to fast at any time in your life, then obviously you are exempt from fasting. And that says in the Quran, al-marid or safar and things like that.
I know these penalties are relative to the month of Ramadan. The outside of the month of Ramadan, sinning in general, is there also penalties? Because we don't really hear about it.
There are punishments for them. So there are punishments for sins. Yani, for example, adultery has a punishment for it. Stealing has a punishment. Not something that you pay, but there is a physical punishment. Of course, there's proper Islamic courts that do these things. You don't just catch a bloke down the street and say, hey, you stole, yallah, bring him to my house. Like they did in Auburn once. They caught one of their friends drinking, so they whipped him with an extension cord. They remember, it was on the current affairs. Wallah, their mate drank alcohol, so they whipped him with an extension cord. And they bruised his body and that. And obviously, we don't have the right to do that. The punishment is taken up by the qadi, the judge. And he looks at the issue, what were the reasons, what happened.
The law of the country, yeah.
Sorry?
The law of the country.
And generally now the law of the country. Is there any more questions for?
I think there's something very important.
Yes, please tell me.
Zakat al-Fitra.
Zakat al-Fitra is a small amount you pay, and it's an obligation on everybody, whether they fasted or didn't fast or anything like that. It is a small amount to pay after your fasting. It equals, I think I calculated it with the teacher once, come in, it's about 750 grams to a kilo or less than that. It might be, if you send it overseas to Syria or somewhere like that, it could be anywhere between $10 to $15. And it's called Zakatul Fitra. Any questions?
7 minutes.
The Sheikh is going to put a small dua on before the iftar. We've got about 5 or 6 minutes, and Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
Jazakallah khairan.